and actually disrupt the inequity that they are trying to escape. So you will see this as our anchoring visual as we go through these different areas of programming. And at the end, we hope to give you an opportunity to share some ideas and questions with us.
And one thing you might notice at the center of that visual is equitable access, and the focal point of our work, our time together today, is the student. That, you know, you can create the most amazing EL program, you can have a clearly articulated vision and plan, but if you don't have the procedures and protocols that support that plan, then it's not necessarily a true vision. And you may actually have a very articulated program plan, you may have some procedures and practices that support that plan, but you know, you are working with staff that may come from more of a deficit mindset, and then unfortunately students don't receive the equitable access that we're talking about. So our focus is really going to be thinking through the lens of students with these additional support structures.
We want to show you this too as a reminder that what we're really talking about is change management. And you're going to see, this is from Harvard Business Review, but you're really going to see 6 different aspects of this, because what we share with you is by no means easy and it's by no means quick. It is urgent and necessary for our kids. But this is just a reminder and a thought to set the stage that as you embark on this, and maybe you already are, I'm sure you are in your different areas of work, that it's really, really important to do these 6 steps of change management as you increase buy-in and change structures, pedagogy, people, practice for the good of our students.
And Jen and I often talk about this, you know, as when you're thinking about change management, when there's not voice, and voice is choice, when there's not voice and choice, and students alongside educators feel like they are a part of this overall vision, what happens is unfortunately inequity. And so I think it's always important to kind of anchor the work that you are doing in really having a clear vision and having it be clearly articulated before any of the kind of procedures or practical steps are taken. So as we kind of think about this, and Jen and I are going to talk through this together, we often think through, I don't know where my tongue went on a Saturday morning, think through what are the conditions, the systems, the school leadership, the administration, what are the conditions that absolutely must be in place to ensure that the programmatic decisions are being made from that equity standpoint. And, you know, we think through these 4 different lenses, you know, who are your students? As Jen and I both shared, and Kelly also does a lot of this work, we support students from a variety of different constructs. And so, you know, one of the things that I'm doing in Albuquerque Public Schools may work there, but can't necessarily be replicated in a different construct. And so we have to really understand who are the students, what are their background, what is their journey by which they came to these classrooms. And I think that's the work that Helen Thorpe has really outlined in her book, The Newcomers, because she really gives us a vision of these students' journey to the classroom and understanding how that impacts their life as learners, but also all the other elements that we sometimes overlook as part of that school experience. And so Jen is going to talk a little bit through some of these programmatic decisions that have to be in place as well.
I think that at South, which is the school that Helen's book is based on, these questions were the way that we led and what we thought through, all in tandem, meaning you can't do one in isolation without the other to really drive toward change and really impact the outcome of kids. Like we are going to talk about, starting with a vision that empowers kids and community, as well as uses the resources available to you, is really crucial as you think about resources from a fiscal, curricular, technological, human, and then how can you push toward that change within your political climate. Before, I'm going to actually outline some national statistics that I'm sure all of you are familiar with, but this is not just unique to Denver. As Kelly talked about, there are a growing number of SLIFE students, so students with limited or interrupted formal education, as the ELs are the largest and fastest growing population in our schools. You can see on the slide some state percentages. The differences in the unique profiles of our language learners is so important to understand. So a student who has education and literacy from Mexico may have different needs than a student who has been in a refugee camp in Syria and may not have been to school for 4 years. They both can learn, they both need and deserve the chance to learn, but the programmatic structures that we are going to talk about specifically address some of those unique needs for SLIFE students. I want to frame for you, I'm sure you have seen these, but this is, depending on where you work and your entry point into creating equity for kids, these federal cases guide schools and guide the work with schools. So we all know that every child is entitled to a bilingual education if it's available to them, and it does have to be offered and provided, although as you can see on the right side of the slide, sometimes it is not. We all know that any student learning English has the right to resources to learn. As Mia and I can tell you, unfortunately, we're still struggling in the US with school districts not providing English language development or support for kids. Very, very important that we have programming that evaluates students in programs, that the program is effective and the criteria is met with Title III. Again, I'm sure all of you know that sometimes those needs are met through Title III and sometimes they're not. And you also may have heard of Plyer versus Doe, which means that undocumented students have the right to go to college, or excuse me, school, public school, no matter what. So even in our environment right now, with things like DACA and immigration bans and many, many other things that are going on, we have a lot of work to do. And we hope to, like we said, ignite this conversation and keep it going so we can support our kids and families.
So, and this may also be an entry point for many of you, and the process by which our students, even our new arrival students, become part of the structure of school is, unique a little bit to each district, but the process is also similar in that our students have access, right? And then the students will enroll in the district, and each state actually has the ability to create their own home language survey. Some people call it an LUS, a language usage survey. They're all very different, but have some kind of guided questions. And it's kind of like a series of dominoes. It trips a system of support. Theoretically, once a student is identified as a student who speaks a language other than English, then they have access to services, and those services are based on performance on a language assessment. And so each state does it a little bit differently. Kelly and I both work alongside the WIDA consortium, so many of those that are present may be part of the WIDA consortium. I noticed there was someone from Washington. Washington has its own framework and its own assessment tools, as does California, as does my home state of New York, right? New York does some things a little bit differently. The point being here is that I think we have to take a different lens when we are looking at new arrival students, and how do we structure supports to ensure that when they're enrolling in school, that there are systems of support just even for that enrollment process, because it is daunting at best as we consider the language needed to enroll a student in classes, and just all of the steps that are needed, especially if a student has not been in a formal educational setting for a very long time, if ever. And so some of the structures that we consider that are normalized for some language learners need to be considered from a different angle when we're considering our new arrival students. What are the community liaisons or NGOs or non-government organizations that can be part of, that facilitation process? And, oftentimes the very first thing that happens for these students is an assessment. Well, how daunting is that their introduction to school is a test. And so how do we make sure that these students not only are feeling welcome, that there's a community that is built around ensuring their success? And so those are some things that we wanted to address. The other thing that you'll see here on this slide that I'll just really quickly talk through is, we often think of language learners or ELs or ELLs, depending upon where you are. On the East Coast, sometimes people refer to language learners or multilingual students as ESOL. The consortium, WIDA, has actually taken on the language of multilingual. But I think there are, as Jen has already discussed with you, there are very distinctly different needs when we think about looking and administering a language assessment for our students that are newcomers, and just how different their needs are than a student who has been part of a schooling system. Sometimes some, although I think this language is changing, which I love, around the LTEL or long-term English language learner. I think that's sort of a deficit mindset. So we are, trying to change those conversations. But again, thinking through, who are the students? What is their background? Even getting a date of birth for some of our new arrival students can be daunting at best. Jen probably could tell you, Kelly could tell you, I certainly can tell you stories in which students, they put the 1st of January as their date of birth, and every member of their family also miraculously has that exact same date of birth. But, that kind of documentation when you're surviving in a refugee camp may not be part of, the protocol of, thinking through what's next. So just things to consider.
So as we start to go into some specific structures, we just want to anchor this in what we know to be true. And we're going to talk about programmatic structures. These get at some pedagogy, but they also get at mindset. And so as our work continues, it's so crucial to remind ourselves and others that all students can and want to learn, and that content and language are best taught simultaneously. Our students come with assets. They come with skills, with background, with knowledge, with intelligence. Even if they've never been in school, they still have things to leverage in the classroom and as they chart a path through their future. If they have a strong foundation in oral language, that's going to facilitate the acquisition of language. So we know that proficiency in reading and writing in their L1 is oftentimes facilitates the acquisition of an L2, but even that oral language is really, really crucial. And we know that our instruction for Ls has to address both content area standards and language demands. So as we work within these structures, we want to anchor these and cement these as some best practice of pedagogy as well as mindset to support our newcomers.
And as we think about those best practices, that all students, regardless of their previous experience, outside of a school setting, that's part of that equitable access. So as we think about, who our students are and what are the programs that are needed to kind of create this program, vision and plan, maybe some of those statements that we provided to you previously may be part of, as you work together to create your own vision and plan, and then support with procedures and protocol. So if we know that supporting students with oral language acquisition, then pedagogically we want to ensure that students have an opportunity, no problem. We provide students an opportunity to actually speak in classrooms, right? At the secondary level, we know that if we look at instructional practices, the Center for Applied Linguistics did a great study about kind of the number of utterances in a secondary class. And if that's a 90-10 split in which the teacher is lecturing for 90% of a 60-minute block, that's going to be very hard for our students, especially our new arrival students, to attain content language. And without content language, they are never going to get the necessary skills to attain content knowledge. So we're going to continue moving through this vision of equity. I think this is a great place to start. So as we think about, again, that program vision, This is kind of based on the work outside of New York and the Department of Education. And if you're interested, we can put some of these citations into the chat for you so you can take a look at these resources yourself. But it is a very much an asset-based lens, right? We value diversity, not just in, a Taco Tuesday, but we value diversity in meaningful, equitable ways. We look for the background in all students. We ensure that that background of students is visually and an integral part of the community. And we ensure that staff voice, again, that voice is choice and participation, creates the buy-in. And also we think through, what do our community partners, members need? And also how is their voice included in the overall missive? And I'm gonna have Jen talk about this through some of the work that she's doing with TNTP. But I think, these are some of those kind of crucial center focal points that if we're gonna serve students, we have to start here first.
Mm-hmm. And this is, nothing can exist without this. Oftentimes our EL students, especially our secondary SLIFE students, are intentionally and unintentionally an afterthought. Siloed programs, they're not included in mainstream courses, they're a school within a school. That links to vision. And vision comes and is developed collaboratively, it's holistic, it's informed by data sources, qualitative and quantitative, that come together to really value and affirm all kids, no matter what. And so this anchor is so important, and that's why we started with this, because if this is not present, nothing will be able to be followed through. So we're going to, those guiding questions that we put at the beginning, we're gonna go through each of those. And so we started with vision, we're gonna move through those now.
And so as we kind of think about, okay, so if we are equitably going to be serving our students, one of the questions that Jen and I often field when we are doing, thought partnership work is around time and scheduling. And if any of you have worked alongside the schedule for a large urban or even a rural high school, there are so many considerations that need to be taken into account as we think about, okay, what do these students need? These are students that may or may not have had interrupted formal education. They may have some needs as far as just language development, reading, writing, speaking skills. And then there's also some very specific requirements for high school graduation. And so we're going to talk about this with broad brushstrokes, but I think one of the pieces that needs to be considered, again, if we're looking through this very focal mindset of students first, we have to think through how do we meet the needs of these students as well as the rest of our students. Jen and I could tell you 1,000 stories of teachers who are like, well, this is my classroom. We can't serve those students here. Why can't they take yet another gym class as opposed to having access to something more rigorous like AP biology? How can we make sure that my students actually have access to course credit requirements? We get very stuck as educators around grades and, is the student performing as, their monolingual peers? And then the last piece that, we want to talk about here, and we have, a limited amount of time. I think this actually could be one whole webinar around considerations for scheduling, but, what does it look like to actually do some modifications for creating equitable access and schedule so that newcomers have exposure to, the gamut of what a high school can offer, especially around that high school experience. And I'm going to have Jen talk through this just a little bit before we move ahead.
So crucial things with these questions that we're talking about with master scheduling, if these do not exist where you work and with the school you partner with or the school you're in, start talking about them so that they do. Kids and families have got to know their path towards proficiency and graduation. They have to be part of those decisions. So something like a pathway document that shows them the courses they can take, that shows them how long they will be in school, how long they can be in school. If they're 17 and they start at a level 1, can they graduate? What classes will they have to take? Classes have to be open access. And I know that this is controversial, but I will tell you that anecdotally, out of the 1,600 students at South, all of them took an honors or AP class before they graduated. Our newcomers reached proficiency in 5 years, and 94% of them graduated. So this is possible, and it can be done. The next thing to think about is that teachers teach everything and everyone. So the hope is that if you teach AP Bio, you also could teach newcomer bio. If you teach AP Lang, you could also teach ELD Level 1. That allows for teachers to gain the professional development, the scope of language acquisition and progression that's needed. It also creates shared ownership and increases the equity and access to all classes. These pieces are really crucial mindset and action pieces that are going to lead toward defining a master schedule and choices for kids that are going to increase their proficiency and their future.
And we're leading with the notion, again, of students first, right? That equitable access. So the next place that we are going to move our focus, and both Jen and I are going to talk through this, is, okay, so if a teacher is required, or part of the vision of the school is that teachers teach an entire progression, that they do teach a newcomer kind of integrated math class alongside maybe an AP geometry or algebra or trade kind of class. What does it look like to support educators on a campus like that? What is the professional learning that's needed to best support staff? And that actually is, I'd like to take that lens even broader. So if we took kind of a 20,000 foot overview, systems that really work to supporting students from an equitable place are systems that actually have all voices involved. So that includes counselors, that includes all of the integrated support staff. And when professional learning is open to the gamut of educators and beyond on a campus, there's some pretty amazing things that happen. And so one of the two questions that we often field when Jen and I are working to support districts and administration from kind of a thought partnership position is, how do I even know what professional learning is needed? And what if there is, a deficit mindset that professional learning happens, gosh darn it, on those 2 days right before school starts, and teachers and staff, in its entirety are just trying to prepare a building? And then how do I ensure that all the staff is prepared to work with all students? And I think that goes back to, Jen and I have been talking about thinking through that programmatic lens. And if we have this vision that, we are all here to serve, and serve being the operative word here, that we are all here to serve from this equitable place, then all staff then is prepared and is given kind of a gamut of professional learning opportunities to serve all students. Do you want to add to that?
Just keeping in mind before we go to the next slide, thinking back to that change management, this is not something that happens in a 3-hour session the day before fall break. This is ongoing. It is committed and sustainable, and you are really changing a mindset, right? You're equipping staff with skills, but you're also equipping them with a mindset. And so thinking of change management, just to remind us that this is not quick or easy, it's just urgent and necessary.
And so as we think around ongoing staff professional development, we know that change happens when there is that dedication and it is ongoing, right? That we're thinking through, providing opportunities in professional development that's coupled with data, that we're utilizing the student performance data in meaningful ways. I think, almost have too much data at some level. And so how do we hone in on the different components of the data that we are using? And to be honest with you, in a secondary setting, we are very siloed. And so, the English language department may work completely in isolation from math and sciences or social sciences or even the visual and performing arts. And what happens there is that we don't start to create or paint a holistic vision of who this student is. We might find students that have great potential and performance in the maths and sciences, and then they're really struggling in classes that require a great deal of language. And so how do we provide opportunities for students, educators to co-plan and really utilizing that informative data and formative data to really provide instructional feedback. I'll have Jen talk kind of through that culturally responsive teaching lens, which is, again, a whole other webinar.
So there's a reason why it says commitment to CRT. CRT is not something that we do in first hour on Wednesday. It is a mindset. It is a way, a pedagogical approach to teaching, and it is infused in everything. So if we expect that, we have to provide the support for it, and we have to make sure that that commitment is ongoing and sustained. I think another piece that's really important that we sometimes forget is how we turn and direct our professional development needs to be influenced by family and student feedback. Not only feedback from educators or feedback to educators from administrators, but what does our community think? What do they need? What do parents want? What do students want? What do they need from their staff that's going to increase their experience and make it a more positive one?
And there's such a great opportunity there with the community component to leverage those support structures right there in the building. And so again, we go back to this kind of anchor vision. As you start to build this program vision, what opportunities, what resources, what services do you have in your community that can be, a part of the ongoing learning experiences of not only your educators, but the community as a whole. And when we think through those lenses, it makes such a difference for the supporting student success in your classroom. And so the next big picture kind of big picture ideas that we are often asked about is, okay, so how do we support these students beyond just the classroom? And the two questions that often come up for us, so, Jen and I have created and fielded hundreds of questions, and these are kind of a synthesis of the ones that we often get. And there's a lot of work, especially now, around kind of social emotional health for students, but what does that specifically look like for the newcomer student? Because again, it's a very different experience than the students that may have, are simultaneous bilinguals that have been in US schooling systems. And so as we think through student success beyond the classroom, Jen and I always think through kind of a holistic approach. What are the resources and services that are provided? One of our campuses here that we have in the Denver metro area has opportunities for students to march right down the hall, and there is actually a health clinic, a university supported health clinic right there. There's also dental services right there in the school because transportation is iffy at best. And so, if we want our students to be in school and we want to support them, what does it look like to provide that equitable but also holistic approach so that they're not missing 3 days of school just because they need a cavity filled? And I know that seems overly simplistic, but it actually isn't when we kind of think about providing these support structures for students.
So one of the things, especially with our SLIFE students, is ongoing mental health support. As many of you know, the approach to mental health and the perspective of it may differ by culture and country. This piece for students who may have been through extreme trauma is so crucial because, as we know from an affective piece, they're not going to be able to access anything if that trauma is not supported. So just as an example, at South, the newcomer students had access to a full-time partner with Jewish Family Services that gave them art therapy, group therapy. There were 9 mental health support professionals in the building dedicated to students and families. That seems like an impossible task from a resource standpoint, and I will tell you that Colorado is number 48 in student funding in the nation. So there is not extra money, but there is the outreach and the support of the community. And so this, just like the commitment to an equitable vision, ongoing staff development, open access to classes, this is another thing that has to be committed to, because this cultural outreach and sensitivity, ongoing mental health support is something that is going to change outcomes for kids, and it can be done. It also increases not only the perspective and accessibility for students, but also can help their families and actually helps staff, because staff is then exposed to some of the bigger stories of students and can understand how they show up in the classroom.
Again, that's, as we think about mental health, that is an entire webinar in of itself, and thinking about social emotional health structures and supporting our students. We're going to shift gears again, and this may also seem very obvious, but transportation is huge. And as we think about, actual seat time and supporting our new arrival students, negotiating all the ways to get to school is huge. And so we also have to think from a broader perspective. What are the needs of students beyond, kind of the bell-to-bell instruction? And what are the opportunities for those students to access all of the other things that may happen in a high school? And so what are the resources that can be accessed? Can we utilize some of the Title III? Can we utilize other creative funding sources to consider ways in which we get students to school? And then even bigger picture items, I work with several districts in which, the students may have access to a bus, but how far do they actually have to travel to access that particular mode of transportation? And if it's, over a mile, and, the structure of maybe even in a city or even in a rural community, it doesn't feel safe, then the choice is always going to be stay home. Mm-hmm. And so we have to really think through, again, those broader brushstrokes of what does transportation look like, but what does it look like beyond kind of this bell-to-bell instructional time?
One of the things that's really helpful is not to assume that our kids or families know how to ride the bus. And so the first 2 weeks of school, we're teaching our newcomers how to ride the bus, what refrigeration is, what lights are, sanitation, the bathroom, basic things like that were crucial to survival. I think another piece that's really important that Mia mentioned was safety. Since our most recent election, our students have experienced some additional hate crimes on the bus from other adults, and we actually have instituted a buddy and parent program where friends of kids and other adults in the community actually have volunteered to ride the bus with kids so that they feel safe. Most cities also have a reduced bus pass program. And RTD, which is the bus system in Denver, has been a great support and community partner to make sure that our kids not only have access, but they're safe.
And one other thing just to add really quickly there is, the Denver Metro community has done some interesting things with a partnership with the library and also with the SCFD Science Institute funding, in which students have attached to their student ID. They have access to all of the library services, obviously for free, but they also have access to all museums, the zoo, and that is also free for students any day, anytime. So again, thinking broader brushstrokes, how do we provide access for students and their families?
Another piece that's important for this experience outside and beyond the classroom is if your program or your school has the opportunity to hire a paraprofessional, that is sometimes the difference maker for kids and families. South had over 70 languages, so obviously that L1 support was not possible all the time. But 14 native language paraprofessionals were present in the school all the time. They were a community bridge. They lived in the community. They provided that cultural broker that we needed in order to help kids and families feel safe. The partnership was secured by them to outside refugee organizations that exist in Denver to make sure that kids had not only, like we said, transportation and mental health, but did they have enough clothes? Did their family have furniture? Did they need anything else that was crucial? Did they need their immunizations updated? That paraprofessional support is definitely hard to find. but it's also an opportunity to empower people in the community that may have the language and cultural background to, like I said, be that broker and really support the kids and families in your system.
And kind of alongside that, paraprofessional or liaison is the notion of a community navigator, and that role is huge. That role has the opportunity to work alongside building counselors, but also provides an opportunity to have some integration with the community to ensure the success of students. My favorite topic is around leveraging community businesses and organizations and non-government organizations, because we often think about some of the faith-based organizations which are so crucial and helpful, Lutheran Family Services, Catholic Charities, Jewish Family Services, some of the larger organizations, but there are so many great small, very small non-government organizations that are doing some great footwork, and oftentimes they have a very specific missive. So their vision and mission is very focused on one element of supporting a new arrival community and family. And so understanding kind of what is available in your community, if anything, and how to leverage whatever services are available in your community in meaningful ways, so that there is that opportunity to provide services for students. And again, the other piece that both Jen and I are very passionate about is meaningful family outreach and involvement. A lot of times family and outreach and involvement, actually another webinar topic, is, in which we are inviting families and communities in. But, one of the things that I contend, and I think Jen does too, is how do we bring that voice to the community? Many of our community members, simply just logistically cannot come to a specific school-based event, or cannot attend, some of the things that occur after school simply because of, childcare and other expectations. And so what do we do to make sure that there is that ongoing communication?
I think an important piece to remember with that bolsters that connection is positive home visits. Every student at South got a home visit from staff, and we wrote a state grant so that staff were paid $34 an hour. And we visited over 900 incoming families and brought them a South t-shirt and a South backpack and welcomed them. We heard from the families what they needed from us. We asked them, how do you want to be involved? We did not tell them how to be involved. And we created that positive relationship. And sometimes our outreach, our home visits is only for things like truancy. But that building that bridge and doing that outreach was a really positive way to build relationships. And it also provides a synthesis of how can I respectfully enter your home and how can you feel welcomed at our school.
And that work is messy, by the way.
There's it's not easy, but it can be done.
There's nothing about that work that's not messy. It is certainly messy, and that is actually the fun and also the beauty of doing that kind of work. So as we kind of round, we wanted to really make sure that there was an opportunity. It's arbitrary and bizarre at best to be, Jen and I are sitting in a large library community room with just the two of us having this conversation with you. We want to make sure that we have an opportunity to field any questions, provide additional resources. There are so many different ways to become an ally in addition to all the great things that you are doing. So obviously your service is part of how you, you serve your community. So thank you, first and foremost, thank you for your service, and thank you for ensuring that, our new arrival students, alongside of all of your other students, have an equitable, fair shake at, their educational services. Again, we mentioned Lutheran Family Services, Jewish Family Services, Catholic Charities. There are lots of faith, but there's also lots of non-faith-based organizations that are doing some great footwork on the ground. We had a great organization, and they still do, in Colorado, that has been helping with, basically they refer to themselves as an underground railroad, and doing some work around helping families as they, move from places in Texas and they are staying in homes as they become resettled and part of our community. Jen and I, this is such a small list. It's also a favorite list from Helen Thorpe of some of these great reads that are out there about refugees and immigrant students. Feel free, if you have not read any of those, they're wonderful. So feel free to access those if you are looking for other resources and ideas. Jen and I both have, please feel free to reach out to English Learner Portal. We are so grateful for the opportunity to work alongside English Learner Portal. Kelly is a great friend, colleague, and she's doing some really wonderful work in the community. So feel free to access those classes that she provides. And, both of us have provided our email. Please, by all means, if you have specific questions that you would like to ask either of us or both of us, we are happy to help. We are appreciative of the opportunity to continue this conversation, because at the end of the day, it's the obligation of all of us that are born in a safer room to open the door when someone in danger it knocks. And that's a great quote that has kind of guided all of our work. So I think it's probably easiest. We see all the chats going by, but we are unable to see kind of all of what they are. So just last pieces, and we'll put back our contact information, but this is part of a bigger body, if you will, of work that Jen and I are working on together around just the practicality. We used very broad brushstrokes today, but the resources that both Jen and I are working on are around just practicality. Here are some guides, resources, things as you think about, the stories of your students and what does it look like to support them.
So we will continue to share that and make sure that you have access to those resources as we continue to develop them and share them. And we just want to reemphasize how crucial it is to think outside of our own world, right? So whether that world is a classroom, a school building, an agency, a nonprofit, the state level, the district level, that we really think about this holistic nature and vision of what this can do and really help to change outcomes for our kids. We want to give you an opportunity to ask any questions or share any experiences that you have. You can definitely speak. We would love to hear your voice and see you if possible. You can also put that in the chat, and we will do our best. We have about 6 minutes left. And Kelly, we also want to respect if you want to give any closing statements too.
Now, I've been watching the chat box and answering some things as they pop up. No real questions, but a ton of very exciting collaboration and sharing and exchanging emails, posting links. So for everyone who's been following that, it's been a little rapid fire, which is amazing. But I think I captured all of the links. I'll double check. This evening, it takes a little while for the videos to process once the webinar is closed, but once that video processes and is ready to share, I'll send out an email to everyone who's registered to include the links that we've shared. Jen and Mia have graciously agreed to share a PDF with the slides so that you can refer back. And I have a list of follow-up things that we can be working on to support with our newcomers. So any questions, if you want me to unmute your mic, go ahead. I don't think there's a way for me to unmute them all at the same time. So if you want to say something through the microphone, please put it in the chat box that you want me to unmute you. Otherwise, type your questions. Jen, Tatiana's asking if the new teacher project will have summer service opportunities.
Are you meaning summer service opportunities to learn or to teach, or both?
Tatiana, I'm unmuting you so you can.
Oh, hi, an honor, ladies. Thank you so much. I'm calling in from New Jersey. But I'm part of NJTSL, and at one point we talked about, when we were learning about the stories coming out of Texas about the refugees, we wanted to help. We wanted to find ways that we could work, because obviously we need people who are culturally competent, who may speak the languages that are needed. And, of course, during our breaks or during our summer recess, would be a good opportunity to maybe get a group together to do this work, which is a very important work. I mean, I found resources for lawyers who could go, but we couldn't find anything for teachers. So
Yes, so we can, I would definitely send me an email and we can figure out how to set that up, because we do work all over the country to support teachers in developing their skills with both pedagogy and mindset.
that'd be great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Kelly.
And I
No
think,
problem.
Tatiana, you are asking for opportunities to serve in Texas. I maybe misunderstood your question, but as a group of NJ TESOL folks that are obviously bilingual, biliterate maybe, and
Yes.
to support in Texas. And so there are a couple of great faith-based organizations that are doing some great work around kind of resource gathering in Texas, but there's also some other non-government organizations that are doing some resource support work as well on the ground. So, shoot Jen and I both an email, and, we would be happy to see what we can do to connect you with the right resources. And thank you very much for your service.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you all.
We have Laura Gardner, who's part of English Learner Portal, is our resident expert in all things refugee services and many connections with folks working along the border. So I will also put that question out to her. I'm sure she can gather some information also. I may not have that back in time to send out with the email this evening, but of course, as I get it, I will send it out as a follow-up as we gather more information.
One of the things that I wanted to, and I'll send over to Kelly, there's some really great videos. So if you are tasked, I noticed in the chat a little bit as I was kind of focusing, trying to read quickly, there was quite a few of you that serve in double capacity, or 4 million capacity, let's be honest, that you teach in a classroom, but then you are also tasked with doing professional learning throughout your building or the district. There are some really nice videos out there that really provide a unique of, what does it look like to be a Congolese refugee student by way of Tanzania and some of the Tanzania refugee camps, or even, what does it look like for our Rohingya Burmese students? We are still resettling some Rohingya in the United States, or even, thinking through the Syrian lens, what does that look like as our Syrian community has made its way to the United States and to countries throughout the world, and just giving you a kind of a unique perspective without, leaving, traveling, getting that perspective. So if that's something that would be helpful to you, there are 4 video links that Kelly has, and feel free to explore those as well.
All right, we're right at 1 o'clock. Couldn't have planned that any better, ladies. So any last questions, go ahead and pop them in the chat box. You have the emails. You have mine from the invitations, but it's info@englishlearnerportal.com. You're welcome to email one of us, all of us, anyone, for follow-up as you think about it. And again, just to wrap up, we will share the video recording, the links that were shared in the chat box, and a few other things that we'll gather between now and this evening with everyone who's here. And thank you again so much. We had over 500 people sign up for this webinar, which tells us how, first, it warms my heart of how many people care enough to sign up on a Saturday to spend their time learning, but also how much of a challenge it is. And so I really appreciate everyone's willingness to be sharing emails and outreach and everything that comes of this. So feel free to also look on Facebook. We have a private group, our members only group on Facebook. So look us up on Facebook and English Learner Portal and see if you might want to jump into that community also, so you can continue the support after today. Mia, Jen, any last words before we say goodbye?
No, I think both English Learner Portal and I as well tweet quite a bit, and usually it's just resources. Try not to do anything too political. So just, great resources, things that are happening in the community, because, the best practices are often replicated in ways that are unique to you. And so, I always love to share out the great things that as a thought partner, we get to see teachers doing in their classrooms and administrators doing to support that EL program plan missive. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We would just want to thank all of you for your time. And Kelly, thank you for the space and the platform to share this. And so appreciate your camaraderie and helping all of us move forward together. So thank you.
Anytime. All right. My Colorado friends, stay warm.
Thank you.
Like wrapped in the blanket and got the big shirt today.
It's warm here today, so we're good.
Is it? It's cold and wet here, so I'm not loving it. But I think about you guys anytime I complain about being cold. Thank you for joining us. We will be in touch. We'll probably need part 2, part 3, on and on forever. So we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
For joining us.
Bye.